Hello, colleagues, and welcome to the next episode of DINCast, where I'm delighted to be joined from the far reaches of the United Kingdom with Gib Bulloch, who is would call himself a recovering entrepreneur, but a hugely experienced leader from the corporate world, who's going to share with us some insights into the role of business in society and what it takes to be an entrepreneur, and lots of other areas where I'm sure you're going to be interested in. But Gib, welcome along.
Thanks, Ian. Delighted to be here. Big topics to cover and not a lot of time.
Absolutely. Well, let's crack on then. So for those people who've not had the pleasure of meeting you or hearing you speak before, do you want to just sort of tell us a little bit about yourself and in your sort of leadership business journey?
Sure. Well, I'll do it very, very, very quickly. Scottish accent you can probably pick up. You may have to put subtitles on the recording afterwards. I went to the bright lights of London in the 90s, joined a big consultancy organization, was trying to tick all these boxes of what would make you successful and wealthy then in terms of following the herd. And it was actually a sabbatical I took in the Balkans that changed my life, I guess, in many ways. And I went back into this company and tried to create a social business inside the corporation. So most people leave the organization, become entrepreneurs or social entrepreneurs. The difference was that I tried to do that within the company, which was Accenture, big multinational consulting company. And this social business against the odds grew. I was very lucky to lead it. We were providing consulting services on a very low price in all developing countries around the world, attracting lots of great talent. I had the best job in the world. And then the sting in the tail, I suppose, is had something of a burnout about 5 years ago. And what I call the corporate immune system, the sort of antibodies of these big organizations that are so focused on short-term profit started sort of kicking in. And so that was the trigger for writing a book. I'm not here to promote books, but those that want the full story can listen to it in audio or read the book. It's called The Entrepreneur: Confessions of a Corporate Insurgent. And really it's telling a story of what it's like to try and drive change from the inside of an organization. If we can get these enormous super tankers, global corporations, moving in a slightly different direction, just 1 degree there or 1 degree there, my view is we can have a massive impact. But we need to make sure that we look after ourselves while doing that, because it's not an easy job to do. So there you go in a nutshell.
Well, you've touched on a really interesting subject there, and something we've visited in previous sort of DINCast, which is about these big, large-scale transformation programs and why so often they fail to deliver the expectations of and that momentum when you first sort of start out. Now, obviously, you've chosen one in a massive, massive company. I just wondered, were your experiences any different working in that environment to try and elicit this change, or did you come across the same barriers that other leaders come across?
So just to be clear, Ian, I absolutely know that changing cultures in these organizations is hugely difficult, and most of these big transformation programs will fail. My ambitions were probably somewhat less than that. I was just trying to nurture a guerrilla movement within the beast to create a small group that would deliver ultimately large change. And it's this notion of small change in a large ecosystem can have big impact. But I wasn't under any illusions that I was going to transform the culture of the company. Well, maybe bit by bit it would, but in this little bit of the organization, we were doing something radically different. We were challenging norms, challenging perceptions, and almost acting as a blueprint for how a social business, a non-profit, could actually survive and thrive in a for-profit environment.
I'm sure a lot of my members could relate to this approach in terms of being the stone in the shoe of the organization, but showing them what the benefits can be about thinking sort of differently. I just wondered, what were the challenges that you came across that really challenged you the most when you were trying to do this?
Oh, crumbs. Myriad challenges. I would say this immune system that I refer to, corporate immune system, and that's not going to be unique to corporates. I'm sure most organizations will have a kind of invisible system that tries to protect the norms, cultures. I often pinpointed middle management just doing their jobs, middle management enforcing the rules, following policy, doing the things that they wouldn't lose their job for. And that's difficult when you're trying to break the rules in some way, when you're trying to do something differently, then you find yourself coming up against these kind of attitudes. You find yourself flying in the face of performance management processes that reward last year's behaviors and don't incentivize different behaviors. Policies, you can't do that here. Why are we working in developing countries? There's no market for our services. Why are you asking these people to take a salary cut? These were all parts of the business model we were trying to innovate in. So there's lots to unpack in that, but it's hard in any organization, I'm sure.
So as part of your sort of journey, I suppose, and where we sort of got to meet was around this concept that actually to accelerate, you've really got to decelerate, and you've actually sort of start to slow down. I just wondered if you could sort of explain a bit more about your thinking and the method that you propose around that.
Sure. Well, the notion of creating a decelerator, and that's what I'm doing at the moment. Another somewhat crazy idea. I'm trying to renovate a farm on the island of Bute, where I grew up in the west coast of Scotland, and create this business decelerator. And the notion of a decelerator is really just, again, a somewhat flying in the face of received wisdom around what business should be. We think businesses should be going faster and bigger and incubating and accelerating change. And I'm trying to suggest that maybe the answer is to, in fact, slow down or start by slowing down. How can we innovate and drive change and connect to what's important in our lives if we're running around, like headless chickens, 60 hours, 70 hours weeks, which were quite the norm in the corporate world. So I think we are so busy doing what we're doing that we've lost track of where we're going as businesses, as individuals in many ways. And I think the pandemic, if I'm able to kind of not date this too much, but it's on everybody's mind, I think that's shown that when people are forced to slow down a little bit, forced to reflect, that we are starting to see people thinking about their own roles, their own lives in a slightly different way.
So obviously you work a lot with leaders and exec teams and things like that. And sticking with the COVID, because I do think, as I say, that there are lessons to be gleaned from this. How has your thinking around businesses and the role of business and leadership changed as a result of what you've seen over the last year?
So I'm fairly, I say I'm not anti-business, but I'm anti-business as usual. I really think that there is a latent potential for businesses, particularly the large corporates that I was working in, to do so much more in the world. Take the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, which are the sort of manifesto of what we need to do as a world community by 2030, and it's around how we feed and nourish the next billion on the planet, how we provide access to clean energy, how we address climate change, how we provide these people with access to education. These are the kind of goals, and my strong view is that we need to see these as business opportunities in disguise. If we can rethink what businesses do, who they serve, how they serve them, how they can innovate towards these challenges rather than just line the pockets of shareholders next quarter, then I think we're onto something there. So it's not, for me, it's a dichotomy to think of, do we do business and do we do good, have corporate responsibility or a foundation off the side. I'm saying these things have to converge, and we can start to find ways of tapping into new sources of value for business by addressing social and environmental needs.
I mean, that's really important in terms of what the opportunity COVID has given us to have a step back and look at the purpose of our business. But I suppose a lot of organizations, particularly as the ones that you've worked with in the corporate world, are driven by sort of short-term returns. And, do you think it's been made easier to think more long-term now? Or actually, do you think that, for the next few years, we are just going to be thinking more short-term about survival? And isn't this going to make it even harder to then focus on the social aspect?
Short-termism in business is a huge problem, and that's where we're seeing that the markets have been pushing leaders to take these choices that are going to increase earnings in the short term or increase their bonuses in the short term. My sense is that these sustainable development goals are much more of a longer term thing. We need to find ways of helping businesses do the right decisions for the long term benefit. And that's not going to be easy, but I'm particularly interested. Just in the last week, we've seen this GameStop sort of casino capitalism thing, where the mass of coordinated action by small investors in the US started to really influence the share price of organizations. It's almost like we're democratizing corporations or investment. So maybe there is a chance, if we collectively decide to reward organizations that are behaving in the right way, if you will, that we can start to address that short-term financial only myopic view. We can start to get employees and the broader public to start to incentivize companies to go after, the right things in the right way.
If you were sitting down with one of my members in the social housing space, either with the exec team or the board, and they'd put to you, how can you help us take advantage of the opportunities to build a more inclusive and diverse business? How would you start to their thinking off, and what sort of approach and steps would you be looking to go with them with?
I think it goes back to this question around leadership that you mentioned, Ian. What I'm talking about in my experience of working in large multinational organizations is maybe on the face of it 1 million miles away from working in the social housing space, but I'm sure there are parallels. I'm sure leadership, if you will, can come at all levels in the organization. We tend to associate it with the boss makes decisions, or you need to have a certain job title with a VP in it or something to make decisions. I'd say that the best ideas for the organization, the best ideas for the social housing market may well be in the heads of employees at all levels in the organization. And how do you create, as a leader, the right culture to incentivize these ideas to bubble up, that they won't wither on the vine, that they won't be snuffed out by the immune system that I've talked about. And how do you, the last point, I suppose, is back to this deceleration notion. How do you, in some ways, accelerate change by allowing people the headspace to be innovative, to be creative in their jobs?
I mean, when you're looking for some inspiration or motivation, what organization or what sort of sector do you look towards as actually, they're a good exemplar, or they're starting this journey in the right way? Which organization sort of really excites you?
I mean, I can answer that in one way, that would be looking again at some of the better performing corporates in this space. I'm a great fan of, for example, what the likes of Unilever has done over many years, and just recently they're talking about not just paying a living wage, not minimum wage, for their own employees, but starting to insist on that through their own business ecosystem, their supplier networks and distributor networks. So you start to see that they can really move the needle on things like inequality in some ways. But I would also say that with my business deceleration hat on, I'm looking at inspiration more, tangentially, rather than in the silos that we get ourselves in. We're in the social housing group and I'm in the business group. I'm looking at things like art and improv theatre is another great way, and music and all these other sort of things that have been tended to be in our spare time. How can we actually bring these stimulants of right brain thinking? How can, what would the artists be thinking about the social housing problem? What are the kind of, techniques in music that could be applied to create new ways of thinking out of the box in your sector? So I wouldn't look in the normal places for the answers to that. I would be looking somewhat tangentially.
And you touched on this in the opening piece about the importance of looking after your own personal well-being and the sort of the issues you had sort of working in the Balkans and things like that. So how does Gibbs sort of look after his own personal well-being to make sure you're always at your best when you're working with others?
I wouldn't be as arrogant to say that I've really cracked the nut on this. When I stumbled out of the corporate sector 2015 or so, 2016, it was only looking back in that I realized, just the pace that I was working at, the fact that I was cramming every moment in the agenda with stuff to do, because I felt that was what was going to make me as effective as possible. There was no gaps. And there's a lovely Japanese term called ma, which is MA is a Japanese symbol for it, but it's about intentional space, a space full of possibilities. It's a bit like the spaces in music that the gap between the notes that make music sound good. And so I'm trying to get more ma space into my life. I'm trying to take long time off at lunchtime to go for a walk or walk the dog. The dog's champing at the bit at the moment. Reward myself with these times and space to think. Meditation is something that I'm relatively new to, but I've got to practice on that. Bit of yoga. So balancing the doing with the being, I'd say, getting enough sleep, eating properly, drinking a bit less alcohol, a bit more water. There are many things to do, and it's a work in progress, but I think we could all probably do a bit better than that, and less is more when it comes to well-being.
You make it all, you pull it all together and sounds so simple to sort of, but I know it is a lot of hard work for you to do that. Well, look, we've reached the end of our time for this DINCast, Gib. I think it's something that,
desperate to go outside.
Well, look, it's been fantastic hearing a little bit about you. I do hope we can get you back in front of our members within DIN, and we can find out a bit more and hopefully learn some of the lessons from you about slowing down a bit that will allow us to go a bit faster in the future as well. So thank you very much for sharing those insights, and enjoy the walk with the dog.
Pleasure to talk to you, Ian, and I hope that some of these thoughts are relevant in your sector and for your members as well, not just in the corporates. All the best.